Good evening and welcome to our final panel event with Survivors' Voices. So that's almost a month gone by already, and tonight, to celebrate the success so far, we have got an amazing panel of some guest speakers and also some returning survivors, also some faces you might recognise from our videos. So the consultation finishes this Sunday, so you only have four days left to go. There are two options for everybody, any survivors watching. There's the full consultation questionnaire, and there's also the quick yes/no question on restorative justice. They are all on the comments with the link in the comments just now, and both of them are on that, so you can go in and have a look. So tonight we're going to go straight into the discussions because we've got such a large panel and loads of questions and loads of people to talk to. So let me introduce you to everybody first. So we've got Madeleine Black with us. So Madeleine's author of Unbroken, which is a story of her own survival story. We've got Pat Mair from Talk Now. We've got Victoria from Thriving Survivors. We have got Ailbha, who has been through restorative justice herself and has also done the videos for our myths and misconceptions, which you'll find on YouTube. We have also got Jackie here, who is doing illustrative representation of all our panel events and focus sessions. And then some faces you'll recognise. We've got Jane Marie and Wendy as our returning survivors. So I think I've got everybody there. Okay, so first up, Madeleine, thank you so much for joining us tonight. So you are now a world-renowned author for your own book, your own story, Unbroken, and you're also now a multi-event TED Talk speaker. So delighted that you can join us tonight. Can you tell us a bit more about yourself and about your story?
Sure, thank you so much for inviting me. It's a real honour to be here on your final big night. So as you said, I am a speaker, I'm an author, I'm also a psychotherapist and a recent podcast host. I started a podcast during lockdown because all my speaking events disappeared with COVID, basically. So my story, Unbroken, my book, is really my own journey of having been gang raped when I was 13. And it really follows my story of healing, surviving, forgiveness, and hope. It was only when I was writing my book that I became aware that I'd been raped 3 more times as well. So it just shows you how we minimize things and we push them out of our head. And, it didn't even occur to me. I just had no idea about consent in those days. I just thought I'd put it down to bad sex. It was just a bad experience. But when I was writing my book, when I was in my late 40s, early 50s, that's when I realized actually, So my story is quite a big story to tell you all in just 10 minutes, but it's been an incredible journey really since I first shared my story with the Forgiveness Project, who also do a lot of restorative justice. And I take part in a program which we do in prison called Restore, which is not restorative justice, but it's a very kind of like a personal development course, which goes over 3-4 days with prisoners, with inmates, there's prison officers, and there's 3 of us from the Forgiveness Project. And that has been incredible. Many of the people I know from the Forgiveness Project have done restorative justice. They're not sexual violence survivors, but other restorative justice. And I've never experienced it, but I've heard how powerful it can be for both sides, not just for the perpetrator or the victim, both sides. It can be incredibly healing and powerful. So I'm really interested in our discussions this evening. I'm really keen to hear how it was for survivors, because it made me think about my own journey. I thought, I don't know if I'd want to sit opposite the people who did that to me. There was still a bit of fear inside of me. And I thought, now it's many, many years later, I wouldn't know what I would want to achieve, but the very idea of sitting in the room with these 2 men who nearly killed me and raped and tortured me every way they could, to be honest, it does frighten me a bit. So I'm really keen to hear how it was for everyone. But I never intended to be a speaker. I shared my story be 7 years ago this September, and I used to call myself an accidental speaker because I was just invited to share my story. I realized that I can speak about it with no shame anymore, because it took me many, many years, but I know the shame was never mine to start with. The shame always belonged to the perpetrators. And every time I spoke, I just was invited to speak somewhere else. So it's just been this brilliant journey. I've gone all around the world. As we know, sadly, my story is not uncommon. My story is the story of many, many women and men somewhere on this planet, and children that will be raped and abused at some point every day somewhere on this planet. So I just really passionate about speaking out, just to end that shame and the stigma and the silence, and just to show people that you can go through some really awful times. And it was very dark for me for years, but you can heal and you can actually grow through what you go through, which is very hard to say. I've had to practice saying those little words for a long time, but you can. I think now I'm in a place where it's post-traumatic growth, and it really came from speaking out. I think if I'd never spoken out and found my voice, I would still be holding myself back. It was really, for me, I guess, the final puzzle in my jigsaw of healing. Not that I suggest everybody stands on a stage and shares their story, but to find someone to share it, to break that silence, I think is so important. So yeah, that's what I do now. I stopped working as a psychotherapist a couple of years ago because I was being asked to speak more and more. And I literally was traveling the world, and then COVID came along, as I said, and emptied my diary. So I do a lot of online stuff, but it's not the same. I do miss audiences and people, but I'm just determined to use my story just to help other people, to serve others, to show them that, it's really possible to heal, that none of us really are broken beyond repair. You really can get past anything. And yeah, that's me.
Oh, thank you, Madeleine. So, Madeleine, I've read your book, and I mean, at the start of it, when you describe actually what happened to you as a horror story, and the fact that you have come out the other end, and every time I hear you speak, which I've heard you speak multiple times now, it's inspiring how positive you can be after what has happened to you. So it's interesting when you said that you still obviously have that potential fear of the idea of coming face to face with the two people who abused you at the start. And do you think, obviously you don't have to give your opinion on whether you would or wouldn't, but do you think that people having the choice for restorative justice is a good thing?
Always has to be a choice. You can't force anything on anyone. It always has to be a choice for both sides, I'd imagine. And I know, so one of the women I know from the Forgiveness Project is Jo Berry, whose father was killed in the Brighton bomb, and Pat McGee was the man who planted the bomb. And she and him, his ex-IRA, they now speak together. They travel the world. When we used to travel the world, and they've been having a conversation, they say, for the last 15 years. And now she is a restorative justice facilitator. And she said the way that we did it, there was no pre-work, there was no interviews, there was nothing. I just went to his house one day in Ireland and met him. She said, looking back now, it was completely crazy way to do it. But I think if the preparation is done and both parties are agreeable, both people have to make the choice, and anyone can back out at any time if they get cold feet, then yeah, there should always be a choice. Absolutely.
That's fantastic. Thank you, Madeleine. We'll have plenty more questions for you later on. So Ailbha, I'd like to come on to you now, because obviously through the weeks, it's actually been going only a number of 7 weeks, this whole process. It feels like a long time. But right from the start, you've been involved with Survivors' Voices, and you were kind enough to help us make the videos, and we addressed 10 of the main myths and misconceptions, are really just the questions that people have when talking about restorative justice. So obviously, you are here as the voice of experience. You've gone through this as a survivor and gone through restorative justice. So can you give us your story and tell us about your experience?
Sure, absolutely. Thanks, Heather. So just to begin as well, I'm an ambassador for Restorative Justice International. to mention that. So that's kind of why I tend to speak out about my experiences as well. So just to give you a little bit of background then on, how I came to be through the process. When I was 21, I experienced a physically violent and sexual assault at the hands of a stranger when I was coming home from work one night. I was very fortunate in that some guys came along and they rescued me, and I was extremely fortunate in that the person was apprehended, and I went through basically the criminal process. And I found that challenging, but I've often said that my experience in the criminal justice system was probably the best type of experience you can have as a victim, in that the person in my case, he pled guilty. There was a very decent sentence in the end, which I was happy about. I got to present a victim impact statement as well, which I found quite cathartic. So from that perspective, I was fortunate, and so once that ended, I kind of felt like everybody had just kind of dusted their hands up and said, right, that's justice is done, get on with your life now. And for me, almost immediately, I began to sense that, actually, no, there's something else that's needed here. And I couldn't quite put my finger on it, and I went on with my life, and I did the best I could. I went to, therapy. I did all the things that people do after, having a traumatic experience and suffering PTSD. But this sense of, I suppose, a need to confront the person that had harmed me came over me. I kind of began to imagine kind of, what if I met him on the street? What would I say to him? What would it be like to ask certain questions? Because, a lot of victims of crime, and maybe a lot of the survivors on the call today might, also have that experience of just having questions about it. Like, for me, it was, why did you do it? I couldn't get my head around that. And another question that kind of kept up for me over the years was, I wanted to understand whether he had intended to kill me, because, I was rescued, by passers-by. So, at that point, I felt like, right, I'm never going to have the answers to those questions. How can I? He's in prison. I'm never going to see him again. It's just not possible. And it just so happened that I was really fortunate in that I was speaking to one of my sisters one day, and I just told her, I said, I would love to sit in a room with him. I would love to ask, tell him, how I feel. I would like to ask questions, and she said, that's interesting, Ailbha. That sounds a bit like something called restorative justice. So, finally I had these words that connected to what I wanted, and I hadn't had that before. I think I vaguely had heard about restorative justice, but it hadn't really processed in my mind that much. And from there on out, I connected with Marie Keenan, who I know has also been part of this survivor, this whole consultation and project. And we pursued a restorative meeting with the perpetrator in my case. It did take quite some time to come about, just through the mechanisms in Ireland anyway. It was kind of challenging. I believe I was one of the first people to pursue a meeting in a case of sexual violence, via the kind of official channels, I would say. And then, so I suppose I'd spent many years, as I've described before, living in what I deem to be kind of this perpetual state of disempowerment, because, I kind of, and I think a lot of people might relate to this, if you have post-traumatic stress, you'd often think things will trigger you back into that experience. If you hear something in the news or you read something in the paper, it all comes back. So I felt like I needed something to fit that, and I suppose piece by piece, like, I suppose once the process kicked off, the next thing that has to happen is, obviously, and Madeleine was referring to it there earlier on, you have to kind of engage in these preparation meetings. And it's a really, really important piece of any restorative process, because within that stage, what comes out is, I suppose, you're able to kind of narrow down what you want to achieve with the meeting. I suppose you get to have an understanding of what to expect when you go into the room and face the other party. In my case, it became clear that, for instance, this person didn't feel too much remorse for, what had gone on. I was unlikely to get an apology. But that was fine for me because, I had things I wanted to achieve that didn't involve an apology. And I actually referred to that in the myths as well. Doesn't always have to be part of any process. So I had probably about six meetings with the facilitators in my case before we actually entered the room. All along, the whole process is voluntary. So, it was possible that on the day that this person would not show up, but in the end he did. And I have to say, I had one of the most profound experiences of my life on that day. I walked into the room and almost immediately my fear began to evaporate, because what I faced was not this monster that I'd had in my head, not this kind of, scary person that kind of came out of the darkness, but instead a human being just sitting on a chair, and he just looked like kind of any other man. And immediately I literally felt this kind of sensation of fear lifting, and I sat down, and I kind of had a big long I suppose list of things that I wanted to say to him. So I got the opportunity to say all of those, and he could respond if he chose to, and I also got to ask my questions a bit, like, why did you do it, and lots of people would say, did you get the answer you were looking for? And I would say the answer, like, there can be no reasonable, rational explanation to why he did what he did. Of course, we know that. But for me to be able to see from his perspective what was going on for him, helped me personally, and it was something that I wanted to see the full picture, and that brought me an enormous sense of closure, and I also asked the questions about the other questions as well, and I got an answer. And it was funny because as we began to speak to each other, and he became more human to me, like, different things happened. Like, at one point during the meeting, I found myself laughing, which was something I could never, ever, ever have imagined doing in that man's presence, but it absolutely was transformative. And the meeting came to an end when I had said all I'd wanted to say, and he had also said his piece. And when I walked out of that room, I immediately felt completely lighter, physically lighter. I felt very healed. I felt I had enormous closure, and it has really, I have to say, it has really inspired me to, inform people about this, because I had been looking for something for so long, and in the end, I just, by sheer luck, kind of came across it. And the more I find out about restorative justice, because obviously I'm very personally interested in it, and I recently kind of took a course on it as well, with the view to hopefully becoming a facilitator over time. It has high satisfaction rates for victims of crime, and that's like a statistical fact. And it also has kind of a positive impact in terms of it reducing post-traumatic stress, and I personally can really relate to that. Now, I'm not here today to try and convince anybody. It's, I'm really not. It's everybody's choice. But what I can say is it absolutely can work fantastically for people. And I'm living proof of that. And yeah, I mean, it's been a wonderful gift to me, as I would always say.
Thank you so much, Ailbha, for sharing that with us. So obviously you've had this positive experience, which is fantastic. And it's great to hear that, having been given that choice, you've managed to move forward out of that sort of state of fear and unknown. And now obviously you are an advocate for restorative justice. Can I ask a question? Have you, when you're out speaking and promoting restorative justice, so to speak, have you received any backlash? Because I know that obviously the whole process of survivors' voices, it does stir up things. There has been a lot of backlash as well as the positive sides, and it's to be expected. You know, it's such a sensitive subject, and it's what it's all about. At the end of the day, it's about everyone having their say, whatever it is. So have you found that you've had backlash from people about when you're positively, you know, sharing your story?
I would say, I'd say rather than backlash, it's been a misunderstanding maybe of what, you know, what I'm saying maybe, of what the benefits are. And that's why I kind of suggested at the outset, the myths thing is important to kind of dispel them. But I think there is a fear around restorative justice, understandably, in that, you know, I think the perception is that it's like, you know, there's some kind of pressure on survivors to go in and forgive, or pressure on them to go in and you know, it might cause them to feel re-traumatized, for instance. But there's a huge amount of you know, misunderstanding maybe around that, and how that can be overcome. You know, firstly, there's absolutely no pressure or requirement on anybody to do anything they don't want to do, you know. So I suppose that's the kind of it's been more of a misunderstanding, I would say, than a backlash. You know, I know people want to kind of protect people that have been traumatized. That makes sense. I understand that, but in protecting people, it's important not to also disempower them, because obviously it's a disempowering experience being kind of violated in that kind of way to begin with. So I personally believe the way to help survivors is to empower them, not to kind of protect them to the point that they can't make their own decisions. It's a really important thing.
Thank you, Ailbha. That was great. Thanks so much. Pat, over to you. So thank you for joining us. So you're here obviously as our organisation tonight. So from Talk Now, can you tell us about Talk Now, what it is you do, and also how you became to be involved in Survivors' Voices?
I will. Thank you so much, Heather. And thank you for inviting me. This is a great opportunity for myself. But first of all, you know, I had it all worked out how I was going to start talking about Talk Now. But I would like to say, Ailbha, how do you pronounce your name?
Ailbha.
Oh, sorry. When I first found out about restorative justice, and how I pictured it and how I thought it would go was everything that you said. So I was quite nervous about tonight, but listening to you and my thoughts and how I see it working is everything that you said. So I'm quite excited now. So you'll probably have to end up telling me shut up. But anyway, Talk Now. I started Talk Now 9 years ago. And I started it myself, and I ran it for quite a few years myself with some voluntary workers. So when I started it, it was for survivors of childhood sexual abuse. And we kept that going for a good number of years, but it was just myself because I'm a CBT therapist. I had student counsellors working with me, and I had voluntary workers doing the admin. So we did that for about 4 years. And then I tried to get funding from the lottery, funding from the government, and I kept on getting knocked back. I was getting small funding like the postcode lottery, and other places would give me donations and things, which helped me to keep going and pay the rent. But the government were doing some investigation into survivors just before in-care survivors, the investigation for them. Before that, they did an investigation into survivors and what they need from the government. So I'd applied for government funding, and one morning I went in and it says, sorry, you're unsuccessful. And I was like, oh no. But that night I had a phone call for the lady who never gave me the funding to ask if I would get involved with this investigation. And I was like, I'm not too sure. I was quite angry. He never gave me funding. But anyway, I thought, you know what, Pat, it's not about you. So I got involved with it. And what I had to do was get survivors together. And the survivors, the government, there was 3 people for the government, came to our Talk Now office, and the survivors told them what they need from the government. So, and it was absolutely excellent. The survivors found their voices, and it was great to hear them saying, we need this, we want this, blah, blah, blah. So the next day, the lady phoned me up, and she says, how do you think it went? And I says, oh, it was absolutely excellent. She says, the reason I'm phoning is to offer you funding. I was like, what? Aye, that's the truth. That was the start of Talk Now growing, because we had to stay at a certain level. I couldn't put it out there because we didn't have the money. So we got the government funding. So that built up my confidence as well. So I applied to the lottery, sold my soul to them, and lo and behold, the lottery gave me funding as well. So it was onwards and upwards for there. As soon as I got the lottery funding, got the government funding, Talk Now just grew and grew. I started to employ counsellors, sessional counsellors, and as time was going on, we were getting bigger and bigger. We were getting referrals coming from all different organisations, but most of all psychological services, which was great for me. It was great for the organisation. So, and the good thing about the psychological services was I went over to give a talk one day about the work they do. And when I'm talking about Talk Now, I am so passionate because I love it so much. And I was talking about how we're now, this has been years going on, we're now working as a trauma-informed organisation. So we're working with sexual abuse, domestic abuse, physical abuse and emotional abuse, but it had to happen in childhood. So, but that was fine. We were just getting organised to do that. But anyway, I gave my talk and told the work we do in trauma, and one psychiatrist stood up and he says, do you know what, Pat, Talk Now is actually more qualified in trauma and abuse than we'll ever be. Well, you could not be doing me a favour. I was like, oh my Lord. And it was great. After that, it was phone call after phone call, referrals after referrals, CPNs, doctor surgeries, blah, blah, blah. So then I had to keep on employing counsellors and going for funding. And so my life was in applying for funding. So we just grew and grew and grew for there. And then we got a lifelink worker in. So a lifelink worker is somebody who's in the middle of coming to Talk Now and also not ready for counselling, because I felt that there was a lot of people getting lost in the system. And when I done some research, it was people just didn't seem to be getting the help that they needed for trauma. So we got a lifelink service set up. And that was fantastic. That done really well. So that meant the lifelink worker could help the person to get stronger, and also get other services involved if we had to, like addiction, social work, mental health team, anything like that. So that was absolutely amazing. So we grew and grew. So just before the lockdown, actually, I so wanted to work with domestic abuse. I know we were working with domestic abuse in childhood, but I so wanted to work with domestic abuse in the here now. So we were in the process of applying for funding for that. And because we're now working with domestic abuse in childhood, again, Talk Now was beginning to grow. It was slow, but it was beginning to grow. So when the lockdown happened, I thought, oh my God, we need to do something for domestic abuse as well. So we got everything all sorted. The counsellors were all going to be working for Zoom and all the stuff that all the organisation did. It was hard work. So I actually had a phone call for the government to talk about domestic abuse, and I actually said I would love funding to start up domestic abuse in the here now. So anyway, they gave me funding to do that. So it was like, since then, it's been full speed ahead. So just now we're working with domestic abuse, and we're also working with sexual abuse, physical abuse, and emotional abuse. So it has been it's been unbelievable. I never, ever dreamed in a million years that Talk Now was going to be where it is just now. It's absolutely huge. And I think we've got about 19 counsellors working now. We've got students working with us as well. We're doing wellbeing calls at the minute. So we've got student counsellors doing the wellbeing calls, and that's for people that are now on our waiting list. We never had a waiting list before, but we've now got a waiting list. So what we've done recently, but within just before Christmas actually, we put in a group for people who were coming to the end of their counselling. So we put in a group. It's a non-disclosure group, and it's also a counsellor comes and does workshops on like self-esteem, anger management. So that's worked really well. But then the waiting list has been getting bigger and bigger, and I thought I'm going to start up a group for the new people who have never been to counselling before, or maybe they have and they need to come back. So we started up the second group, that was in January. And that group has, the two groups are good, but the new one for the people who've never been to counselling before is absolutely amazing, absolutely amazing. When we first started at I think it was the second meeting, we had, again, that's a non-disclosure group, so nobody needs to talk about anything. They don't discuss their abuse, so it's more about workshops. So it's more about, again, anger management, low self-esteem, anything that they want to bring to the table, then we'll do a workshop on it. So that's worked really, really well. And watching the people grow in the groups, honestly, there was one night and the tears was coming out my eyes. I thought, oh my God, this is the best thing ever, because it also gets the people ready for counselling as well. So we're also doing outdoor counselling. Not so much now, but it'll probably start up again in the winter there. We couldn't do it. So we started outdoor counselling again. That was very successful, and it was very successful for younger people, because what we're finding now is there is a lot of younger people coming forward, who, when they didn't come forward before, so because most of our referrals now are young people, maybe the age of 18, 25, in between. So most of our referrals and most of the people we're working with is young people, and absolutely love seeing a young person coming through that door. I don't know if coming through the door I used to, but on the phone, when I ask the person their date of birth, and I go, oh my God, this is amazing. I absolutely love it, because it's helping to get their lives back. So that's where we are. We talk now, and we're working 24/7. Well, I work 24/7. And it's absolutely amazing. So going on to Survivors' Voices, Ashley sent me an email and she says she was starting up this organisation in South Lanarkshire. And I thought, oh, right. And then she mentioned restorative justice. And I thought, what's that? I don't even know what that is. So I did a wee bit of research on it, as I had to, because if I was going to join the group. So I looked into it, and my first thought was, oh my God, that'll be great for survivors. That'll be absolutely excellent for survivors. They'd be able to find their voice. And I was also thinking about some of the people that had left Talk Now, who'd moved on. Then maybe some of them's now working and they're going on with their lives, and they're living a normal life. And I was actually thinking of them. And one of the reasons I was thinking of them was a lot of our clients, our survivors, take their abusers to court. So Talk Now, anybody in Talk Now, especially the counsellor that's working with the person, they'll go through that process with them. So the police come to Talk Now. Anybody else, if they want to go criminal injuries, they come to Talk Now. So we organise everything for them. But I remember the very, very first time I was working with this girl, and it was, I think it was around about the second or third time I went through somebody giving their statement. And this girl was absolutely shaken from head to toe before the police come in. And I was sitting there and I'm thinking, oh my God, what have I done? I'm blaming myself. What have I done? Oh my Lord. And she's like, oh, Pat, I don't think I can do it. I don't think I can do it. I was like, do you know what? If you don't want to do it, perfectly fine. Don't do it. Nothing. If you say you don't want to do it, that's it. Nobody's going to say anything. Whatever. So the police come in anyway. And I noticed her sitting in her seat and she was sitting up, and I was like, oh, right, okay. Anyway, she gave her statement, 5 hours sitting, giving her statement.
Wow.
and she was a wee Trojan, she was a wee warrior. She gave all her statement. But that night I went home and I'm thinking, oh my God, I hope she's okay. I hope she sleeps tonight and blah, blah, blah. So the next week she came into the office for a counselling session, and she came walking in the door, and I just looked at her, and her shoulders was back, her head was up, and I thought, what's changed? What's changed here? And she says, Pat, do you know what? I feel so empowered. I feel as if I am going to get my life back for the first time in my life. So that's the kind of things I was thinking about when Ashley was talking about restorative justice. And I thought I was all about the survivor, and the survivor finding their voice and people hearing, because it's still very difficult. A lot of people don't hear, especially a lot of professionals, they don't hear the survivor, they don't want to listen, and that's very evident for me because of the referrals we're getting from psychological services, because when anybody contacts psychological services, they automatically send them on to Talk Now. They don't give them a psychiatric assessment, they automatically get sent to us. So at the beginning I was a bit, that sounds strange, but when I phoned them, they said that that they'd be as well coming to use Pat, because you're the ones that experienced and trauma, so they send them on to us. So restorative justice. So when Ashley spoke about it, and then I thought it's going to be great because survivors' voices will be heard. But I was right into the survivor, not into the perpetrator at all. But it was one day I was sitting, and I was actually talking to my daughter about it, and we were talking, and it was her that says, you've got to think, she says to me, you've got to think about the perpetrator as well, and what they're going to get from the meeting, and how, make sure they've been through, the rehabilitation and think of that. So that opened a brand new world to me, where I had to think, I get a balanced way of thinking for the victim and also the perpetrator as well. So as time's gone on, looking at it in a more balanced way, and knowing that both parties have to, there's a lot of work got to be done on both parties. So that's how I got involved with Ashley and Survivors' Voices. So I'm really, really enjoying it. And as I say, it has opened up a lot. It's opened up a lot in my thoughts on restorative justice and how it can work for both the victim and the perpetrator. So I'm going to continue going to all the meetings. So thank you.
Thank you, Pat. I absolutely love your enthusiasm for what you do. It's so infectious. That's amazing. And you're right. Do you know, there has been a Pandora's box has been opened. There's so much more and so many questions. And I think, to keep me right, is this the 6th, the 7th panel event that we've done? And every single time we do an event and we have different survivors or experts or organisations, everyone asks different questions, everyone brings different points up. And every single week I'm like, oh yeah, and I hadn't thought of that, or I hadn't thought of that. And it's massive, and it's why it's so important that the survivors, like you say, are the ones that are giving their opinions on this, because they will make a difference. The results from this consultation will be taken and used to help, create what restorative justice looks like in the future for Scotland. So thank you so much for Madeleine, Ailbha and Pat for your answering my questions. Now I want to open this up to the whole panel. So everyone can take themselves off mute, and this is where it's a bit of a chat between each other as well. So I'm going to start off with Wendy and Jane Marie. So you have been involved in the lives, you've been involved in the focus sessions, and also the panel events. So this has you guys have been there right from the start, and obviously you were involved as well when the questions for the consultation were made. It was put to survivors as well in order to have you check it before it goes out. So Jane Marie, I'll go with you first. What has been the main learning from this whole process for you in restorative justice?
Well, the main learning for me is my kind of restorative justice comes from, I had to do a lot of restorative justice because of the kind of complex PTSD and the place that I was in. I just found that the system, I was coming into this discussion knowing that the system had done a lot of harm in respect to any kind of restorative justice. But listening, particularly on our panel, when we were hearing about the kind of pros and cons, I think I've learned from the discussions that there's an overall kind of agreement that both the perpetrator and the victim and the survivor, should be considered when the process is going ahead. And I've just learned, I think when we were on and Alan was speaking about his research, and it was extremely interesting. And then the panel that I was on, and it was Women's Aid, again, I was just interested in how the restorative justice system would handle the survivor, because my experience of restorative justice for me has been extremely negative with the system. And I've also experienced times when, personally for me, if the harm has been done against me, and on one occasion, I had to go through the restorative justice process where I had to sit with the person, the perpetrator. And so I was coming into it with kind of like a mixed view, probably leaning towards the fact that restorative justice was really therapeutic. So listening to everybody's comments, there was a lot of agreement about, how Police Scotland, maybe kind of paramedics and things like that, the frontline workers actually deal with people with trauma, and how that really should be improved. I think it was Pat there that was saying that, that sometimes they don't see the survivor, they just see the symptoms of, what's came. So certainly on my panel, that day that night that we were talking, there was an agreement that restorative justice was positive, but it had to be delivered in a certain way. So I was kind of like really, I was encouraged to hear that. I was encouraged to hear throughout the full consultation process that, ways in which people who are delivering restorative justice, or people who are coming up against trauma survivors, really should be trained in dealing with that. So I think that was the main learning for me.
Excellent. Wendy, what about yourself? You've been through this, and we did a live this week, we did a live as well.
I was had a weekend, so I don't know.
Yeah, so what about yourself? You've gone through the full process here with Survivors' Voices. What's your learnings?
So for me, I mean, I honestly can't believe I'm sitting here doing this amongst the group of people that I am. Pat, you were just an absolute ray of sunshine. That was incredible. But that's actually started for me. I read Madeleine's book in December, and at that point I had a turning point. It was really bizarre. The book was incredible, but it actually, you touched on shame earlier, Madeleine, and for me reading your book allowed me to remove that shame from me. That was something that I'd carried and I was actually so bitter about. And when I read that book, I thought, this shame isn't even mine. And then a number of weeks later, I stumble across Survivors' Voices, and like I've said throughout, I literally stumbled upon it. I can't believe that everything has just happened when it's happened. And then from that, I found Ailbha's work online, and it's just everything's fallen into perspective. But the main takeaway point for me in this, regardless of anyone's view on restorative justice and whether it's right or wrong, or might traumatise someone or might not, the point is that you're giving someone a choice to engage, and a choice that was previously removed from them. And that is that just epitomises the full thing for me. One trigger in my life is when people remove my choice, and I've felt so empowered by being a part of something that allows me to take part in this consultation, to say, you know what, it's our choice to make, let us do it. don't you dictate what might be detrimental or what's right or wrong. Let us make that choice. And the full, like I'll repeatedly say it, I can't believe I'm actually sitting here doing this, and that this is happening, that people want to listen to people like me. It's been empowering, to say the least, but seeing all the other people that are involved, it has been so inspiring. And tonight, especially looking at the lineup, I was incredibly excited to be involved.
Excellent, thank you, Wendy. Perfect. Okay, so there's a wee bit of an echo there. So Madeleine, Wendy there obviously was talking about the shame that people. So I'm just trying to work out who's got the echo. Yeah, Wendy's talking there about the shame that people hold. So what's your advice on that? Because obviously you've mentioned it in your book.
Yeah, second topic, which isn't out yet, is actually all about shame, because Wendy knows we hold on to shame. It's such a time that we take it so personal, and we're also not supported by society. If we look at all, just recently with Sarah Everard, all the victim blaming messages and the myths that are about, and the rape culture, it makes you feel like, well, if I'd have done something different, then it wouldn't have happened, as if we're putting all the onus onto the woman. But no amount of safety advice is ever going to make any difference to anyone getting raped or assaulted, because it's not our problem. The issue lies with the men, the perpetrators that abuse us. I just needed to say that. But yet the shame just really holds us back. And it took me years and years and years to realize that it wasn't my shame. The shame never belonged to me, but we hold on to this inappropriate, misplaced shame for so long because of what's happened to us and because of how society views women, or I think women more than men, that have been sexually assaulted, raped, abused. And also we look at the justice system. It's such a broken system. A few years ago in Ireland, a female judge told a complainant that, well, you were wearing lacy thongs, so what did you expect? Lacy thongs do not cause rape. What was amazing was that all the women of Ireland took to the streets waving their underwear in the air saying, this is not an invitation to rape me, my underwear does not cause rape. So we're up against all of that, and it's the trauma as well. It's the shame is the trauma speaking to you, and it just lied to me, for years and years and years. It made me believe that I was less than, that I was broken, worthless, contaminated, dirty, all of the feelings which I know there's many ways that a woman can respond, but a lot of those feelings are very well known by lots of people. So it takes a lot of work to really do the thing that you thought you could never do, which is actually finding your voice. So at the moment, you may have seen the football documentary, Football's Darkest Secret. So I know a lot of the footballers from Twitter, and I've interviewed two of them, Steve Walters and Gary Cliff, for my podcast show, which is actually going to come out next week. And they just said, I could never tell. If you watch the 3 parts, which I did, which is not an easy watch, but it's important, they were going to take their secrets to the grave because the shame was so huge. So the only way to get rid of the shame is to face your shame, is to stand in it. And for me, that was speaking publicly. And every time I speak, I think, well, this is me. I don't care who knows what happened to me, because it was a crime committed against my body. It was nothing to do with what I was wearing that day, or the alcohol I drank, or the lies I told my parents, or the empty flat that I went to, or the girlfriend I went out that night. It came down to the fact these 2 men chose to rape me, and that was it, nothing else.
Thank you so much for that. Ailbha, can I ask you, so obviously you've gone through this, did you have that, hold on to that shame as well? Did restorative justice help that, or was it not?
I would say I am a little bit of an anomaly in that I personally never felt a huge shame about what had happened to me, and I think that, well, I'm not sure where that came from, but I just didn't. But I did, sometimes things crept in, such as, people, distant people not related to me now, but you'd hear through the grapevine that they kind of reacted by saying, well, why was she why was she traveling home on public transport that late, you know, that kind of thing. So, but I think what's interesting about restorative justice is, you know, I mentioned earlier that I asked the why question, you know, and I mean, if you sit, like for me personally, I can speak about my experience, but I sat opposite this person, and as he was giving his answer, it became, although I kind of knew it already, it became all the more clear to me that actually this is nothing to do with me. It's all about whatever's going on in his mind at the time, you know. So it kind of reconfirmed that sense of like I was at the wrong place at the wrong time for sure, but ultimately it was about, it would have been somebody and it just happened to be me that night, and you know, the reason it happened is all to do with him, you know. So for me, that just reinforced that lack of need for shame, you know. So it was liberating in that way.
Fantastic. So Jane-Marie and Wendy, you've obviously got here a panel of people that are so open to answering your questions. You've got Madeleine, who is an advocate to break the stigma. You've got Ailbha, who's been through restorative justice. You've got Pat, who has spent the last 9 years talking to people who have gone through so many different experiences. What questions do you two have as survivors considering restorative justice over the last month? What questions would you have for any of the panel here? If you get questions in your head that are burning that you just want to ask somebody.
Sorry, my dog has just intruded, so that is who I'm sitting clapping, in case you're wondering why I don't have a basketball. But no, so I think for me, what I do wonder is something I've touched on quite a lot is the re-victimisation, I guess, I felt by the criminal justice process, and it's something that comes up time and time again. So do you think that we can encompass other services into the restorative justice process? So either, you know, sitting down with an offender, or if you don't want to sit down with an offender, sit down with the officers that interviewed you, the paramedics that attended, the judge that was in court, you know, all these different services that are involved in that process. Particularly for you, Ailbha, if you've been through it and you did get a conviction, do you think that there is scope to include agencies in the restorative process?
Yeah, I mean, I haven't heard of that happening per se. Like, I haven't personally heard of that happening in terms of like, for instance, other bodies outside of the actual perpetrator of the crime. But I mean, I think, you know, a restorative process is about kind of restoring relations, you know, not relationships, but relations. And that's to do with interactions with anybody, you know. It doesn't necessarily need to be the perpetrator of the crime itself. I definitely know what you're talking about when you're talking about kind of the re-victimization via the criminal justice system. I also felt very disempowered by the process myself, and definitely have had experience of that. So, I mean, just to answer your question specifically, you know, I don't see why not. You know, I think if we're talking about developing this within, you know, within Scotland and beyond, you know, why not think broadly? I mean, you know, if you feel disempowered or victimized by the process, you know, I think we can think laterally and maybe, you know, encompass them as well, you know, for sure. I just haven't heard that in practice. I haven't seen that happen, but why not?
Yeah. And I mean, in addition to that, I guess another concern I've got is I feel like I wear so many different hats, and you know, I can think in terms of the victim as the survivor, the agencies that don't agree with restorative justice, and like I've said, for me, I do understand the detriments of it, but I think it's so important that for that choice to be there, and I'll say it and I'll say it and I'll say it until it registers with people. But one of the other hats I tend to wear is that at the end of the day, perpetrators are going to come back into society the vast majority of the time. So would it not be you know, appropriate to try and engage them in this process for the purposes of rehabilitating them, I guess. You know, as a mum, I would feel more comfortable with my children growing up in a society where people have been through the criminal justice system and have came out of it rehabilitated, and I don't think that's afforded to perpetrators at the moment, and I think this process would maybe inadvertently, I guess, assist with that. Do you have any views on that?
Yeah, I absolutely do. I mean, as far as I'm aware, there's been no extensive study done on like the impact from a rehabilitative perspective on offenders who have engaged in a process. So I think a lot of it is kind of, you know, as I said, I don't think it's been a massive study as of yet, but I mean, my view of it, I mean, when you think about offenders sitting in prison, either sitting in circles doing kind of victim empathy kind of sessions, or with their own psychotherapists doing that, I often wonder, you know, how can they really understand what they push the victim through without actually hearing the victim's voice? You know, when it's kind of removed from, like, when the human aspect of it is taken out of the equation, and you know, you're thinking of them as the offender, the you know, the perpetrator, the monster, and they're, you know, at the other side of it, they're thinking of you as the victim, you know, this kind of, I don't know, for want of a better word, something inanimate, like not a real human being. I don't think the dots are connected there. I don't think that they can really understand what they've done. And certainly from my perspective, you know, that very thing happened. I mentioned earlier that during the preparation meetings, I understood that this person was not going to say sorry. He was not that remorseful. He didn't, you know, he didn't feel that much about what he'd done to me at all, other than, you know, his self-pity for having gone to prison and stuff. But when that meeting ended, by the end of the meeting, he was calling me by my name. And although he didn't say it in the actual meeting, 3 days later, I got a phone call from one of the facilitators informing me that he'd been supposedly crying all weekend and wanted to apologize for the harm he'd caused me. And I think that speaks for itself in terms of the impact. You know, I know that's a once-off case, but you know, my fundamental belief is, you know, if there's any humanity in an offender at all, it's sitting opposite the person they harmed, or somebody like the person they harmed, that really impacts them, and will bring out that motivation to maybe be a better person.
Thanks, Ailbha. Madeleine, can I ask your opinion on this one? Because obviously you do work with, you know, offenders in prison.
Well, I don't do restorative justice women. It's like a personal development course. You know, I've only worked with the female prisoners. I was meant to work with the male prisoners, but that COVID came in and stopped all the coursework. But I would say out of the 3-4 days, I've done the course twice, the Restore course, from a psychotherapist's point of view, it was the most powerful workshop I've ever witnessed. The journeying that the woman did in those few days, it's all really based around storytelling and forgiveness, not forgiving the perpetrator, forgiving themselves. And every single woman that I spoke to, there were 18 on our course, all came from a place of trauma. All of them had been abused or raped, domestic abuse, were used as drug mules, or they had all come from a place of trauma. It was a fascinating course. We use a lot of creativity, so we use a lot of artwork. They keep diaries. It's all about the power of sharing our stories. And so we use we make like a lifeline, and you choose 5 events. It takes 2 or 3 days to do this lifeline, and you can do it anyway. Then we invite them in a circle to come up and share their story. And then it's like a domino effect. You know, there'll be somebody like me sharing their story. There'll be someone that's maybe been a prisoner, that's maybe been a perpetrator. Then they'll share their story. So one of the guys, I haven't worked with him in prison yet, is Jacob Dunn, who has also done a restorative justice process. He hit a young man once. It was one punch and it killed the man. He then went to prison. He met the mother, he's met the parents, and they kind of just said, look, you know, on behalf of our son, we want you to do well in life. So they've kind of supported him. He's now gone on to do a degree. He's a dad. He's completely flipped his life around. So, you know, we can't demonize people that are perpetrators, because it was one punch. It was a drunken night out. You know, how many guys go out and just get into fights? It's just, you could say it was bad luck, but it was a massive life lesson to him, which completely, you know, changed his path on life completely. And he's doing amazing work. So the Forgiveness Project is filled with forgiveness stories from victims as well as perpetrators. So I know so many perpetrators that have completely flipped their life around. One guy in America, or quite a few, and they call themselves formers. They were former kind of white apartheid, you know, ex-white Nazis. Arno Michaelis, or Sammy Rangel. Sammy has a group called Life After Hate. So they were just out attacking all the minorities, you know, they sang in punk bands that were racist and anti-everyone. And now they work about bringing in respect. So, and all of their life changed. You know, I know them all quite well. I've read all their books and spoken to them when somebody showed them some humanity. So it really fits in with what Ailbha was saying. When we can see the human in the person and you connect with that, because I do think that hurt people, you know. It's not an excuse, but it's nobody comes from a place of perpetuating a crime if they're in a good place. You know, they have to be in not a great place. And if we can meet the human in that person, it can change something considerably.
That's fantastic. Thank you, Madeleine. So, I think we could sit here and talk all night. I am aware of time. So, Victoria, can I come on to you? Obviously, Ashley can't be with us tonight. So, this consultation finishes on Sunday. And I think from talking to everyone that's been involved, it doesn't end here. This isn't going to end. So, when this first started, the sessions, the focus sessions, were meant to be a few sessions before the actual consultation went live, and it was to get survivors to come up with questions, think about the questions, and agree on the questionnaire, so to speak. But those sessions have now continued. So what happens on Sunday when the consultation's finished? You have this amazing network now of people who've been given a voice. What's next?
Yeah, so we know that the group that's came together has been amazing, and the progress so far has been fabulous that we've all seen. So our next steps for Survivors' Voices is to turn this platform that should be ran and maintained by survivors for survivors. We do hope now to go on to meet once a month and have the conversation of what should we do next. And maybe sometimes meeting once, 2 or 3 times a year, and having that direct say in topics that arise. For example, like we did here with the restorative justice. Couldn't ask for any more on the progress that has been made here. Also, one of the key features we aim to promote is the Survivor Spotlight. And once a month, we will shine that spotlight on one of the survivors. And hopefully over the course of that month, they'll be able to share their story and promote a topic of their choosing for the group to speak about, and maybe see what could be done or changed. Yeah, it's been fabulous. So one of the things that came up during the focus group is the topic of the 999 101 phone calls, and the call handling of these cases involving sexual, domestic abuse or violence, and using this platform to go on and aid in the management of this. So, for example, the steps taken after receiving such a phone call, how can the Survivors' Voices platform help in this? So our goal is to use this platform to encourage, to empower the survivors by giving them back their voice, and not only as part of the restorative justice, but for the many other ways they deserve to have their voice be that main focus and be the first port of call for anything that comes up in the future.
Wow. Yeah, that's a lot. That's amazing. Do you know what? When this started off, 8 weeks ago. So the consultation went live on the 28th of February, and this started about a month before. And I was like, this is an 8-week project. This will be great. We'll see what comes of this. This is going to make a difference. And like I said before, it's just snowballed. Everyone that's got involved, no matter what their view, has been so passionate about sharing that view. And I think that's what's so important to get across tonight as well, that it doesn't actually matter what your opinion is. We want you to be involved, because whether you are unsure, you're strongly for it, you're strongly against it, every single voice matters. And for those who have, this has given them the courage or the space to speak up. You can't just close that now. You can't just take that away from someone. So it's absolutely amazing that you already have a plan in such a short space of time to keep it going. So that's amazing.
Can I just add something to that, Heather? Because I got involved in this to give my voice and share my opinion on it. And I think Survivors Voices was looking for that to get voices on board this consultation, but actually without maybe it wasn't meant, but it's given me a voice in every aspect of my life, and that is directly related to this work. I am a force to be reckoned with now, but that's what's been incredible about it. I came on board to take part and give my voice into this consultation, and I'm not leaving. I'll continue to engage where I can, but it has given me so much more of a voice that I didn't have only 8 weeks ago. And it's funny because we talk about connecting the dots, and all those dots were there. Like I said, I read Madeleine's book in December, and there was that initial, wait a wee minute, this isn't my shame. Why am I so bitter about this? And then a few weeks later, I get contacted via social media by Survivors Voices, and then I look at Ailbha's work, and it's just every week it goes from strength to strength. So I just wanted to add that Ashley's initiated this to bring her voices on board, but she's actually instilled a voice, or found a voice that was in there just waiting to be heard, and that can now encompass so many different things beyond this consultation.
Thank you, Wendy. I know that will mean a lot to Victoria and to Ashley and everyone else involved. And do you know what's quite good? And actually, Madeleine, your book. So when I read that, for me, I was like, somebody's out there speaking about it, and they're like about not having that shame. And I actually had an experience at the start of this. I said to my friends, a group of friends I went to school with, I was like, here, would you do me a favor? Would you share this link for everybody? And they said, well, a couple of them said, I don't know if we want to share it because people think that we have been abused. And I was gobsmacked. I was like, seriously, this is the problem. People don't have to actually speak up, as there's that shame, but not just from obviously people who are survivors, but those who haven't even been through it. And that was the start of this process for me. And I was like, wow.
I get so many messages from people on my public page that say, I really want to like your post or leave a comment, but then people will know I've been abused or I've been raped, so I can't. But I just want to tell you privately, thank you, or whatever. It's awful, the stigma that's around and the pressure of, just keeping that shame and just really holds you back. So it's just beautiful to hear Wendy say that actually this process has shown her that she's got a lot to say and she should say a lot. When we don't speak out, we just hold ourselves back in so many areas, which is what you're discovering, that actually to speak your truth and to be heard, to be believed, there's nothing more empowering than that, nothing. And you've witnessed that in just 8 weeks. So watch this space. So let's see where you are this time next year. It's going to be amazing. Brilliant.
We're competing for a speaker there.
Yeah.
No, it's authentic, and that's what's been so good about it. There isn't any filtering out parts. It's just, you can be your true authentic self, and it's just been incredible.
Oh, fantastic. Okay, so I'd quite like to just go round now. Obviously, we're all aware that, I'll say it again, this finishes on Sunday. So the chance for everybody watching who is a survivor, be it of sexual abuse or domestic violence, this is your chance to shape what restorative justice will look like in Scotland. This will go to the people involved in writing what it's going to look like. So it has a bigger impact than just this month. So a couple of things to make everyone aware of. First of all, go and have a look at Ailbha's myths and misconceptions. I find that really hard to say, myths and misconception videos that are on YouTube. The consultation takes about 45 minutes. It is quite in depth. It is completely confidential. You do not have to answer every question. Answer the ones that you want to, skip by the ones you don't want to answer. It is absolutely your choice how much you do. If the consultation you're not ready to do that, you don't feel you want to do it, there is a simple yes/no question. It's completely confidential again. You just tick in yes, no, and done. It's important to put across as well that it is completely about the survivor's voice, which I think has come through clearly tonight. It's all about gathering the opinions of people, and through this we have seen people who are fervently against it, and some people are so for it, and some people are just using this as a great opportunity to learn and hear from survivors and from different people in different organisations and the experts on it as well, who've seen it not just in the UK but also around the world. So please follow the link that is in the comment on this live. On the live, there's a link tree. It has all the different links that you could need. Watch back the videos and listen to all the experts and the survivors and the organisations speaking. Trust me, you will learn so much just from a couple of hours sitting, watching and reading. The amount that I have learned over the last month is unbelievable. It's been inspiring. So even if you don't fill it in, take the time to learn. It is important that we get as many responses as possible. It does, like I say, it does actually shape the future and whether this option will be given or not and how it might look. And we don't know that just now. Right now, it's not an option. So around the table, I just want to ask everybody, what is your message to all the survivors watching live or on catch up? What's your message to people to encourage them to go and fill in the questionnaire or the yes/no questions? So I'm going to go on my screen. So first of all, I've got Jane Marie.
Well, I would just say, you know, the consultation might be a bit kind of scary. It might be a bit much, but whatever's written in the consultation shapes the way that, you know, like for me, approaching the police and agencies was extremely difficult. I think Wendy's mentioned it. There was a whole level of re-traumatization at a different level. So I think for me, the consultation paper would allow survivors to have their voice in all respects, in all areas of the process. It would also then kind of push forward that there is a real need for training in respect of particularly Police Scotland and those who are on the front line in dealing with raped women who are traumatised, you know, and how to de-escalate PTSD symptoms and things that come from trauma. So I would definitely say that the consultation paper is a place, or the consultation questions is a place for every, I think Wendy had mentioned again that it was just raw and it was quite, you know, uncut. So this is a place for people to really have their voices heard, to manoeuvre this new restorative justice movement to be exactly what tailored to what they think and what they need. You know, it's easy just to say, well, it'll go ahead and Sunday, that's the deadline and whatever. But I think more people that openly, you know, just this whole forum has allowed just open discussion about what survivors see as great needs. So the consultation filling in of that forum will allow people just to kind of blast that out. You know, for me, as I said, you know, it was the system. I think, without being too graphic, you know, having been raped and left in a suicide cell for 72 hours naked, it really tells me that the consultation paper is required in respect of agencies who are dealing with women like myself, you know, to understand restorative justice for the victim and for the perpetrator, but really, really, really to be informed about what it's like for a survivor to come forward and report that in that process from the start to finish. And I believe that you know, that the yes or no question answered whatever way, but then there's an expanse in the consultation questions just to kind of, you know, put exactly what your opinions are. So I think it's a great opportunity to give the survivors a voice to try and manoeuvre this new restorative justice.
Thank you, Jane Marie. That's fantastic. Pat, over to you.
No, I would definitely say please fill out the questionnaire. And if you don't want to fill in the questionnaire, then ask the yes or no question. Because what I'm sitting thinking just now and hoping that all the panels that's been on for the last 8 weeks will help survivors to realise that they're not alone. And I know that's a big thing for survivors when they first come to us at Talk Now, as they begin to realise that they're not alone. And I firmly believe that the more voices that come together and you know, and say what they want and what they need or whatever, then they will be heard. But I think this is a great opportunity for survivors' voices to be heard. And please do it. Yeah.
I did it. I forgot to unmute myself there. I thought I'd be saying it to someone else. Madeleine.
Well, I think it's an amazing opportunity for you to be able to shape the way forward, whether you believe in it or whether you don't. Why would you not use that opportunity to make changes? Change is always needed. We have such a broken justice system right now, and if this can make positive changes for the people that choose to go through with it, then yeah, I think it's a great idea. So fill in that form.
Thanks, Madeleine. Wendy?
Thank you, everyone, for sharing your opinion, and Jane Marie for sharing your part of your story. I just, like everyone else has mentioned, sorry, that was my husband walking by. Like everyone else has mentioned, it's an important way forward, you know, for you as a victim or a survivor to shape the consultation and shape the process. If you can offer your time to have a look at the questions, it would be massively appreciated. You know, there's no pressure to continue with it if you feel that anything is triggering you, and there is always support there. So you will find details there, but you know, it is anonymous. No one's going to know that you filled it in, and your voice matters.
Thanks, Wendy. Victoria?
I don't really know how to follow that. I think everyone has said exactly what I was going to say. It is giving that voice back, and the community of survivors deserve to have their voice back. Everybody hit the nail on the head. I don't have much to follow. Yeah,
thanks, Victoria. Thank you. And Ailbha, obviously, you've been through this. You know how important it is for people to have their voice.
Absolutely, and you know, I find it. I'm almost envious of the fact that it's taking place in Scotland. You know, it's so progressive and so inspiring, and you know, I really encourage people to take this opportunity to have their voices heard. I mean, I've been contacted. I mean, everybody knows which side of the fence I sit on, but I have been contacted by people in Scotland looking for this. So it's important that those people, you know, move forward with a justice system that allows for, you know, different types of people to get justice in their own way, you know. So please do fill that form in.
Thank you. So for me, my message to people would be that it's very clear there's a lot of work to be done. There's a lot of gaps. There's a lot of questions. And that's why it's important that people fill in the questionnaire, because those gaps and that work needs to be done. It has to be done, whatever the outcome is. And if it's going to get done, well, have your opinion on it. You've got an opportunity there, you might as well take it. And just to finish up, I want to read one thing that's in the comments. It's not a question, it's just a lovely comment that's been put in to the Facebook chat. And it says, Victoria, so true, the way the organisation has managed the consultation is the best thing to come out of COVID. When individuals find their voice, there's no stopping them. And this panel is a testimonial to that. So ladies, that's to all of you, and your stories, your journey and your contribution. And I think that's a pretty good place to leave it tonight. So thank you all so much for being part of it. Hopefully you'll all stay part of it and the journey that's to come. And yeah, one more time, there's only 4 days to go. Please, everyone, go and fill in the questionnaire or tick the box. And thank you so much, everybody.
Thank you.